brachos having in mind Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah v'arivna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha v'filu fi amcha beit Yisrael ונהיה אנחנו בצאצאינו וצאצאי בית ישראל כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה ברוך אתה אדוני מלמד תורה לעמו ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר בך באנו מכל עמים ונתן לנו את תורתו ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Amen. All right, guys, let's learn a little bit of halacha. So this is in the Mishnah Berurah 178. Okay. And what is the rule regarding the fruits of the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael? If you ate a few olives at home and then left and stopped eating them and carried on eating them elsewhere, I'm just using this as an example. So are they like a bread meal which continues in another place, not requiring a new bracha rishona, the first bracha, or are they like all non-bread mezonot meals that end as one leaves one place and requires a new first bracha rishona? So since there's a lengthy discussion in the poskim about this, what a shock, guys. What a shock. There's a lengthy discussion. One should certainly make a bracha achrona before one leaves. Okay, so bracha achrona is your after bracha, borei nefashot. Okay, so that's you do before you leave. So then if you didn't, and one continues eating, whether by returning to the old place or somewhere new, one shouldn't not make a new bracha rishona. Okay, so in other words, if you do a bracha achrona to finish, then obviously you do a bracha rishona because you finished it, you've completed it in the new place. If you haven't done a bracha achrona, the after bracha, then when you do, then you obviously don't do a bracha rishona because you still have to continue. Because does that make sense? So if you'll not continue eating after you leave, you would go back to the original place where you ate them and make a bracha achrona there. Okay. If you're eating grapes at home and then went to the base midrash and continued eating grapes, you do not make a borei priya eitz, but you should rather have done a bracha achrona at home before you left. Okay. So if you're eating grapes at home and then go to the base midrash where you won't eat anymore, you should preferably go back home and do a bracha achrona there. What's the moral of the story? Don't be dozy. You've got to be aware that when you start to before bracha, you have to actually, sometimes what I do, because I sometimes forget to do an after bracha, is I put an elastic band around my hand to remind me, and I tie to the fork to do the after bracha or to bench before I leave. And guys, to do borei nefashot takes literally 20 seconds. There's no crisis that you're going to have to leave at that pace. You know, none of us are medical experts. None of us can put out fires. There's nothing we can do that an extra 20 seconds where we're going to save somebody's life. You know what I'm saying? We're not that expert. So take the time to do the bracha achrona. Now we're going to start the daf. And what I wanted to just let all of you know is the consensus as follows from yesterday is that our only goal is daf a shavua, okay, a daf a week. And everybody does basically does 7 daf a week. We're only doing 1. So the reality is we will definitely have the luxury to do more commentary, but we don't have to do each and every piece of commentary. Our only goal is to complete the daf that week. And if we don't, there's no sense of achievement. Why? Because then you don't want to spend 4 weeks on the 14th daf. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. All we need to do is do a daf a week. If that week has got less content and allows for more commentary, great. If that week is jam-packed like this week's daf with 8 pages in the Schottenstein, we do less commentary. But doing a daf a week means we can actually tick off a list and know when we're going to finish Bava Kamma. Do I have consensus with that? You're not telling me to hop on it. I'm not, but you guys might be. But I'm quite happy to do it that way. Do you guys agree?
Absolutely. Yes, I agree 100%. And I just want to raise one quick point, is that
Sure.
All the rabbis that I spoke to said that daf HaShavua is 10 times better for the majority of people than a daf a day. Because daf yomi is a daf, it's way too quick. You can see even this pace which Damon's going at, it's quite heavy just to retain everything that he's saying. So I think it's a very good place, and I was well advised by everybody to rather do a daf hashavua. That's my input for today.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, let's get started, guys. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a new approach. I'm actually going to give you the bottom line of the 13th daf now. Okay, so if I get eaten by a shark or hit by a bolt or lightning, you got it. And then we work backwards. Isn't it nice to have the end in mind now? I'm going to give you the whole of the 13th daf in a couple of lines. I hope this helps you. But this is a good idea. And this was given to me by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, who was one of the great, great poskim. Okay. So let me just give you a summary. So what did we learn in the beginning of the 13th daf? I'm just going to give you the whole daf quickly. So we learned that the owner of the animal is responsible to pay for damages done by an animal he owns. That's a general principle in Bava Kamma. But what if the owner has declared that the animal will be brought as a sacrifice? We learned in the daf before that according to the rabbis, if it's hekdesh, that you're not responsible basically for paying for an animal that's holy. Why? Because if it's hekdesh, the term is if it will gore the ox of his fellow, meaning if you damage temple property, you're exempt. Rabbi Akiva says it's the other way around. It comes to exempt the temple's ox from hitting your ox. But the rabbis generally agree that anything that you damage of hekdesh is not the ox of his fellow, therefore you're not responsible. Here we're talking about a case, very simply, where the ox is considered your property, and yet it is still considered hekdesh. How do we know it's hekdesh? Bottom line, ma'ila, only something that can be used for personal use in other words, which you shouldn't do, has to have sanctity to it. Now, what we learned before in the 12th daf is that until the time that you sacrificed Kochim Kalim, that they were yours personally, and that you could use it for personal use. At the point that you sacrificed the unblemished animal, at that point where you could no longer use it, but Kochim Kudashim, you can't get benefit from the minute you declare that it's to be brought from a sacrifice, because it's a higher level of holiness. So we're saying, what is the status here? And we learned from Rav Nachman, who quoted Rav Glili, that basically, if it's Kochim Kalim, it's about the ox of his fellow, meaning if you damage his ox, or if you claim that he never gave you an ox to look after, that he already designated to the temple, you have to replace that ox with fixed damages, which means even though it's consecrated, it's still the owner's property until the time at which it's sacrificed. So we've learned that very, very clearly. Now, we having this question that first came up in the 13th daf, if he's responsible for damage done by an animal that is consecrated in the temple, and we're saying, is it only a bechor, the firstborn of an animal, or does it refer to the case where it's all kochim kalim? Because there are 24 different gifts that the kohanim get in kochim kalim. So the main three categories, as we learned, is what? Is a bechor, the firstborn, maisa, the 10th animal, and the shalem offering. Does that make sense? Those are the three main categories, okay? In terms of what goes to the Kohen. So these are the categories that are discussed. So Rabbi Abai appears to rule that in the case of korban shlamim, where the meat of the animal will be eaten by the owner is responsible, okay, for the payment, but his name. All right.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Give me 1 second.
I've got it. Yaakov ben Yafa.
That's it. Yaakov ben
Yafa. It's his Hebrew name, and we wish him a full refuah shalom. All right. So, guys, I'm going to have to go from this a little bit with memory and a couple of notes, because my screen's going a bit crazy. So let me just give you a bottom line here, so that in terms of the Kohanic gifts, we learned that it's not so straightforward as far as the Kohanim are concerned. What did we learn with the Bachor? At the point where they have to be sacrificed, although the Kohanim can use them, they can partake from the table of the Most High, meaning it's just like a master who owns the animal and gives his servant food. It's not the Kohanim's property. So at the point where they're unblemished and they're sacrificed, you can eat from them, and the owner of the animal can eat from them and derive benefit, those portions that are not sacrificed, but they do not have the rights to sell them, okay? And then what we learned is the Gemara starts in its entirety, the brasa from the ruling of Rav Yossi Glili. The Torah states, if a person will sin and commit a treachery against Hashem by lying to his fellow, this comes to include kodshem kalim in the law of false oaths. For kodshem kalim are deemed the property of their possessor. So these are the words of Rav Yossi Haglili. So Ben Azi says that Rav Yossi Haglili comes to include the shalamim. Okay. Abba Yosef ben Dostai says Ben Azi did not state his position except in regard to the Bechor alone. So there are two opinions. So according to Ben Azi, he's saying that two things are included in the list of what's considered the possessor's property. Okay, number one, it's considered to be the Bechor, which we learned, and the Shalamim. Okay, but not Maisa. And basically, Rav Yossi ben Tostai is saying that Ben Azi, that's quoting Rav Glili, did not state his position except in regard to a Bechor. So what he's saying is that Ben Azi's opinion on Rav Glili is that it's only a Bechor. Okay? And the first opinion on Rav Yossi of Ben Azi is that it's a Bechor and the Shlamim. So let's go into the logic. Let's skip quite a bit. The master stated in the Brisa, Ben Azi says it comes to include the Shlamim. What type of kodshem kalim was Ben Azi coming to exclude? If you would say he was coming to exclude a Bechor, and say that a Bechor is not deemed the property of the possessor, it's not logical to say this. Why? Because if a shalamim animal, which requires leaning, libations, and waving of the breast and right foreleg, you say it's the property of the possessor, is there any question regarding the Bechor? Certainly a Bechor which requires none of the above ceremonies is considered the property of the possessor. So what is it saying here? The first opinion doesn't argue with Ben Azi's quoting Rav Glili, because he was saying there's two things that are included, the Bechor, which we learned, and the Shlamim. But where there is an opinion that says he's only talking about the Shlamim, it's not true, because what it's saying is as follows, is that the owner of the ox, when he has to work with the Kohen in terms of the ritual. So the ritual is he uses a term called smicha. Now, smicha is when Moshe put his hands on, I don't know if you know this, on Joshua, and transmitted his Ruach HaKodesh to Joshua. So the minute you put your hands on someone, it's called smicha. And this is on Leviticus chapter 3, verse 2, which is Vayikra. So there's this whole ritual, right? You put the owner of the animal, this is not the Kohen, must lean on the animal with his hands before slaughtering it. And he works with the Kohen. I think the Kohen does the final slaughtering. And he must accompany and bring the Shlamim with a meal offering and a wine libation. And he must wave the breast and right foreleg of the sacrifice, and then he presents it to the Kohen. Okay? So what it's basically saying in Vayikra chapter 7, verse 28 to 34, is that there's so much activity with regards to the Shalamim. And that is considered to be the property of the possessor. Okay? Now, why is it the property of the possessor? Because the possessor is doing these activities. It's not just the Kohen. He's actually doing part of these processes. Now, if all of these are required for a shalamim, then for sure it's required for a bechor. Because let's look at it like this. A shalamim, if you're doing all these ceremonies, what does it indicate? It indicates that it bears a heightened degree of sanctity. You get what I'm saying? You've got two sacrifices. One, you do all these rituals. It's obviously at a heightened degree of sanctity compared to Bechor. And yet, Bechor, if you're saying that the Shlamim is definitely belongs to the property of the possessor, a Bechor, where you don't do any of these fancy sort of rituals, and it looks more mundane, obviously then the Bechor is the property of the possessor. Is there any questions so far, guys?
Yeah, I've just got one question. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. So when you say, because you do less activity with Bechor, you're saying, of course, it's the property of the possessor.
Correct. In other words, we're not disputing here that the Shlamim animal, according, is considered. How do we say that? Exactly that, Michael.
You're doing less activity, whereas the Shlamim, you do more activity. So
yes, I mean, you can have a question the other way around, exactly as you saying that you could say, well, maybe the Shlamim is actually a higher degree of sanctity, and that doesn't belong to the property of the possessor. But if you're making a statement of Ben Azzi that he's saying that Shlamim is the property of the possessor with all of these rituals, these multiple rituals that the owner gets involved in, etc., and the Kohen. If that's the case, then a Bechor where you do none of these rituals, of course that's the property of the possessor.
Okay, I see which way it's going. All right, thank you.
Sure. Damon, I just want to ask just one clarity, because otherwise it's hard for me to continue. Sorry, because I'm dizzy. The shlamim, is that when a person does a false oath?
No, I know where you got that from. It was using that purely as an example. When you're doing a false oath, you're doing a asham offering, and you pay 1/5, you pay the capital amount. If you're caught out lying, right? You're caught out lying there. You pay the compensation of the animal to replace it, because you're saying, I didn't receive an animal. And your next door neighbor said, but hang on a second. Your next door, we saw that animal being delivered, and then it disappeared from your house. You did receive it. So then a person that lies has to replace the animal, pay 1/5 as a penalty, and a sham offering. And the fact that he has to pay this penalty and the sham offering and replace the animal is proving that in fact that it's the property of the possessor. Because if you damage temple property or lied against stealing temple property, you don't have to pay all these penalties and replacements and the asham offering. That's the proof that it's actually the property of the possessor. The only reason that you thought it was the shlamim is in Schottenstein had used it as an example.
Okay, so what is shlamim? Thank you, and that's great. It's a great example. Thanks for the clarity. So what is shlamim then?
Shlamim, as Michael said yesterday, is just I think Kevin said, I don't remember, is just a known generally as a peace offering. But because it comes from
peace. That's right. Sorry, okay.
So shalom is peace. Just let me finish. Shalom is peace. Shalom means completion. So when do you feel at peace? This is a bit of musa, guys. When your finances are going well, when your health's going well, when things in your life feel complete, you're not panicking. That's what creates the shalom. When you've got a good relationship with other people, that creates peace, and then you feel complete. So feeling complete helps with the peace, and feeling at peace helps you feel complete. Just a bit of musa.
Very good.
I just want to add something. I heard probably the greatest gift one can give oneself out of everything, out of anything, is ultimately peace. I read that somewhere in terms of what the greatest benefit as a human being is, and according to Judaism, is that very thing that you're actually saying, is to have peace generally.
Absolutely.
Because it contains everything within it that you just referred to. Everything within it.
Everything within it. And this is why, just on a separate note for 1 second, is that one of the things that I found interesting about neuro-linguistical programming is that we live in an entire society where we want the car, because it will get us the right sort of girl, or we want the money because it will put us at emotional peace. And one of the things that therapy tries to do is give you that feeling of peace without attaining all these externals. Because with an addictive mindset, you're saying, when I get to this level, then I'll be happy. When I've got this, then I'll be happy. Well, that's an addict. That is actually, Lee Jampolsky, who's a psychologist, turned around in Healing the Addictive Mind, said we're all addicts. The minute you have a mindset of what I have within me is not complete at the moment, and I need some external, whether I'm injecting myself or doing something to feel a sense of completeness, that's an addiction. And it's just, that's what the marketing world is built on. You know, when you have these items, you'll be happy. That's marketing 101. Okay. So let's get back to it. But Michael, it's a great point. And Gavin, thanks for bringing it up, because now we've got a bit more insight. So if we go back, we say, listen, we don't have a problem so much if Ben Azzi turns around and says the Shlamim, it includes the Shlamim, that it's the property of the possessor. If that's what he says, fine. But then you can't exclude a Bechor, because a Bechor is more mundane in the sense that you don't have all these rituals. So you can't then say Bechor is not the property of the possessor and it's more holy. If the Shlamim's allowed with all of these extra rituals, then the Bechor for sure is the property of the possessor. So fine. So then we feel relatively happy. And we say, rather, Rav Yochanan said, maybe Ben Azai meant to exclude a Maisa animal. Where does he get this from? Very quickly. So regarding a Bechor, it states in a Brisa, regarding a Bechor, it is stated, law sifte, you shall not redeem, and it may be sold. It's allowed to be sold in an unblemished state while alive, in a blemished state whether alive or after it's slaughtered. But regarding a Maisa animal, it's stated, Lo Yigael, it shall not be redeemed, and it may not be sold in any state, neither while it is alive, nor after it's slaughtered, neither in an unblemished state, nor in a blemished state. From the fact that a Maisa animal may not be sold, it's not considered the property of the possessor. Why? Because if you cannot sell it, it ain't yours, is it? What's considered an asset? Something that you're free to sell. So, for example, if you look at a property and you buy property, you're buying the land on the property, but you're not entitled to use the mineral rights or sell those mineral rights when you buy it. The government owns it. It's not yours. Only what you can sell is yours. And how does this come in? In Bechorah 32a, it's got the prohibition to sell a Maisa animal. Okay, it uses the term chayrim. It's banned by its owner to sell. Now, just one question, guys, that you've got to bear in mind is it's the same with tzedakah or Maisa money. It's not yours. You get to keep the 90%, right? That 10% is not yours. You only get to keep the 90 because you've given away the 10. It's not yours. The 10th ox is not yours. So we're saying it's not considered the property of the possessor. So what's the difference if you sell it or you don't? We're coming back to the case of, I've got a Maisa ox, and your ox damages my ox. You exempt from paying them. Why? Because it's consecrated. Meaning, if it's going to the Kohen.
For 1 sec, sorry.
Sure.
You need to dive in very hard that your ox called a Maisa ox.
Yeah. But
So
anybody
that you-
with the Maisa ox is going to ship that thing to the temple and have 2 bodyguards quicker than you'd believe. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've only got a few minutes. Oh dear. I just want to cover a bit of ground. We might have to do another 10 minutes, guys. It depends when. But
I'm okay. I'm so dizzy, it doesn't make a difference.
I'm actually flying through as quickly as. Can you guys feel that I'm flying through? Whoosh.
Yeah. No.
I'm trying my best. You know why? Because we don't live in an era where we're giving sacrifices. So it's not as
Correct.
It's fine. Okay, Michael.
Sorry.
It's fine.
Yeah.
We've got 7 minutes left. What I might ask is for literally when I say another 11 minutes, it's 11 minutes. If we finish this, then we're done.
Yeah, no,
then
so
we're done.
I had to open the door, yeah.
No, that's fine. What I'm asking for permission from you, the other guys are okay. If you can't understand, we need 11 minutes if we run out.
Sure.
6 minutes, 45 seconds.
Okay.
I'm flying through. I can't do faster than this. Eh?
Absolutely.
All right. All right. So just with regards to one thing, so mice are animal, you can't sell it. If you can't sell it, you don't own it. If you can't sell it, it's because it's designated already, which means if your ox damages my mice ox, you're not responsible for paying for it. It's already hectish. And if I use a mice ox for my own benefit, that could be subject to me'ila. Does that make sense? Then it would categorize. So now we understand. He's saying that, hang on, now we've got a question on Michael's question originally when we turned the question backwards. What can we state is that according to Rav Yochanan, he's saying Abba Yossi ben Dostai says his position except in regard to a Bechor alone, meaning a Bechor alone would be the only animal that he would consider, subject to being the property of the possessor, because the mice animal has been cancelled out. The mice animal, it would seem, is already your 10th. It doesn't belong to you. So what's he coming to exclude? He's saying maybe we should exclude a shalamim animal. Okay? So this is what the Gemara is proposing. Maybe out of the list that we shouldn't include the shlamim animal as the animal which belongs to the property of the possessor. Does that make sense? And why is it saying that? Because it's saying if a bechor, it's now coming to destroy that logic. So does everybody hear the question? If you don't, I'll repeat it.
I got it.
I think I got it. Just carry on. Just go all the way through.
It's very straightforward. Basically what it's saying is if you want to exclude a shlamim animal from being the property of the possessor, you've got a big problem. What's the problem? Is that you could turn around and say that to shlamim, you choose to give that peace offering, but it belongs to the property of the possessor. But a bechor and a mice animal is different. Again, the bechor, from the minute it's born, it's the firstborn. It's sanctified from the minute it emerges from the womb. It's the same with the 10th animal. It's mice, like, what do you call it? You're like, so mice, the 10th. So the 10th animal goes immediately. Your first animal goes and the 10th animal goes. Does that make sense? And it's not, don't worry about, it's not saying that it's hectic like you're giving 20% of tzedakah. Firstly, Hashem determines what you earn, so you'll never lose out. But secondly, you're giving only on the 10th animal, whereas on tzedakah, you give the percentile, even if you only have 9 animals. Does that make sense? So it's not hectic. It's not hectic. You're getting, you're only doing it on the 10th animal. So the first animal, consecrated, fine, bechor. Then the last animal, maisa, you can't touch it, consecrated. So if you want to say that, how do you exclude the shlamim animal from being the property of possessor? Because it's not sanctified from birth. It only attains sanctity later in life when the owner decides to sanctify it. He could have sanctified another animal. It didn't have to be that one. So why would it not be considered the property of the possessor? You hear the question?
Yeah, and it's also not compulsory. It's
correct.
It's optional.
Correct. And in that animal, even if you want to say it's a good thing, even that animal is not compulsory. You can't do anything. Whatever pops out the womb on the 10th time, that's the animal. Whatever pops out of the womb on the first time, if it's a male, that's the animal. That's the animal. So you can't do anything about it. You can't switch it for another animal. So rather, Rav Yochanan said, Abaya Yossi ben Tostan meant to exclude a Maisa animal. Why? Because we're saying that a Maisa animal is not the property of the possessor. Why? Because it's deemed for tzedakah. I mean, it's not his. It goes to the coin. Does that make sense? It's not his to start with. Because why? You're not allowed to be sold. We learned this. It's not allowed to be sold. So that's the proof. It's not his to sell. So, we're going to carry on with one thing, because it keeps repeating his statement, guys. I'm just flying through. But Abba ben Yosef ben Dostai said that Ben Azai did not make his statement except in regard to the Bechor animal alone. How can you say that he meant to include a Shlamim animal as well? Okay, so I just want to explain to you what this means. Okay? So what's the question here? It's basically saying, hang on. He's saying Ben Azai made a statement that it's only for the Bechor. It's not including the Shlamim animal, which is the property of the possessor. He just wanted to say that Ben Azai's statement was only for the Bechor. Guys, there's a lot of background noise. I don't know whose it is.
Let me mute. It could be me. I don't know.
Please, guys. Okay. So the explanation is therefore rejected. Rather, Baya ben Dostai meant to exclude not only a Maisa animal, but also a Shlamim, since a Shlamim animal possesses greater sanctity in that it requires leaning, libations, and waving of the breast and the foreleg. Okay? So basically, it's saying there seems to be a bit of a question here. Guys, so listen, let me tell you where we were at. Let me just give you a bottom line. So the bottom line was as follows, right? Maisa was out. It wasn't belonging to the individual. Why? You can't touch tzedakah money, you can't touch Maisa money, you can't sell it. It's known as chayrim, it's banned by its owner for sale. You can't make use of it. So if you can't sell it, it's not yours. Fine. So that is Maisa out the window. We're just dealing with Shalamim now that's left and Bechor. Okay? Now we were saying, well, let's basically cancel out Bechor, and you just have Shalamim as being the property of the. We were just saying at first, just let's keep the Shlamim and not the Bechor in terms of one's personal property. And we're saying we can't do that because Shalamim had all these rituals. And with all these rituals, if it's considered by Ben Azai to be the person's personal property, how do we know it's the person's personal property? Because part of that ritual is where he's involved with the sacrifice himself. The Kohen helps him. He's involved with the waving and the wine libations. He's very much part of it, which means it's his. It's his. And the Kohen gets to have the right breast and the leg. Okay, and it's part of the showing, etc. So that belongs to the property of a person. So according to Ben Azai, it's saying fine. But then you can't say that Rav Glili was excluding a Bechor, because a Bechor, you've got none of these heightened sanctity rituals. So therefore, if Shalamim belongs to the personal individual, for sure the Bechor, where there's none of these rituals, belongs to the individual. So fine. So now, so far, it seems like the Shalamim belongs to the individual and the Bechor. Does that make sense? And now we're saying there's a spanner in the works. What's that spanner in the works? Very simple. Is that the Shalamim, and why are we saying the Shalamim is because we're saying that the Shalamim in a certain way is even more relaxed than the Bechor, because the Bechor is designated to be sacrificed from the moment it comes out the womb as the firstborn male. But the Shalamim, you can choose to use that animal or another animal or not to give it at all. So it's definitely the property of the possessor. So there we were saying that so far the Bechor on those two reasons and the Shalamim belong to the property of the possessor, the owner, basically. So if anybody, if my ox damages that ox, it's not temple property. It still belongs to the owner. I have to replace it. I don't have to replace the ox or fix damages. But then we're saying that now we've hit a snag. What's the snag? Abba Yosef ben Dostai is a high sanctity animal. Why? Because of all of these rituals, the leaning, the smicha, the libation, the waving of the breast and the foreleg, all of these rituals is in Teruma 8a. And he's saying because of all these rituals, it's the same as the Misa animal, is that elevates it to the point where it's a greater sanctity, and then it's not the property of the possessor. Does that make sense? The question remains is that at what point is the Shulamim dedicated to not be the property of the possessor? So I think it's at the point where he says, I want to bring this offering. And it's at that point where that offering is no longer his, even if he hasn't sacrificed the animal yet. So then what does that leave in terms of the property of the possessor, the individual? It means it's only left with one thing, the Bechor. Does that make sense? So why are we saying this, it's based on that the Bechor that's only left, is because the Bechor was originally Rav Glili's example. So Rabbi Nachman brought Rav Glili in the example of the Bechor. So he's saying, according to Abba Yosef ben Tostai, he said that only a Bechor is considered a property of the possessor in terms of Kochim Kalim. But Ben Azai is saying that both the Shulamim as well as the Bechor are the property of the owner. That's the bottom line. The Maisa, everybody agrees, is not the property of the owner. Does that make sense? That's not a question. And why do we say that? Because we've got a clear brisa that states that the animal, while alive, is the property of the possessor. The reality is he is allowed to see it. We see that also, and that also proves it's the property of the possessor, the Bechor. So we're saying, but we learned that when it's alive, if it's going to be consecrated, how can it be yours? So what we're saying is in respect to somebody else damaging yours. They are responsible. It is considered the ox of his fellow. Otherwise, you wouldn't put an ashram offering if you damaged it. And you wouldn't have to pay penalties on the false oath, compensation, or an ashram offering if it's the ox of a holy one. It's only the ox of his fellow. If it goes or it disappears. I'm saying if you're making a false oath and it disappears, or your ox damages the ox of his fellow, either with a false oath or with damaging the ox of his fellow, it only applies to individuals. It doesn't apply to holy property. So the Bechor is an example, and the Shlam, according to Abba ben Dostai, it's only the Bechor, because he's saying the Shlamim is a greater degree of sanctity because of all the rituals. Okay, that's the bottom line. Now, we're going to end off on this note. So we're back to the case of if a Bechor is allowed to be sold that's in an unblemished state, whoever buys it, when the temple was around, has to then sacrifice it. Maybe he's a very religious guy. He bought it in the buyer, but he has to sacrifice it if it's unblemished. Or he doesn't have to sacrifice it if it's out of the land of Israel or the temple doesn't exist. But then it's a Kohen that has to buy it, and the Kohen has to wait for the unblemished animal to develop a blemish. And if the Kohen decides to sell it, he has to sell it at his own home butchery and not weigh it up and sell it for less than it's worth. It can't look like regular meat, chulin meat. That's all I want to say. So at the end of the day, all we're saying here is that it seems that it's a Bechor alone. Okay? That's what it actually seems like. Okay? So we're going back to the first analysis. And on that note, guys, we are done.
Thanks, Dame. Right.